So, welcome everybody. I'm Nancy Fox. I am a business owner, president and CEO of Wise Rainmakers, and I'm also a new podcast host of this podcast, which is Hell in the Hallway. And I'm going to make myself the first guest. And the reason is I want to sort of share what this podcast is all about and why I am hosting it. So, Helen Hallway is going to be a compilation of interviews and stories of people who are in the midst of um, thinking about maybe through a reinvention of their career or their business. And we're in unprecedented times. Now, I know every generation has said that they are in unprecedented times, and that is pretty true, except that we are truly in a time where it's sort of like the Industrial Revolution, in the era of AI. And when the dot-com, just began to emerge, we are truly in a revolutionary time. And it's affecting, this all came about right after a global pandemic, and now with the advent of AI and an entire new global geopolitical world order, we are really facing so many different changes and challenges. And I really believe that this podcast is about sharing stories of people who are journeying or have made a journey into new ways of careering and living. And so I'm making myself the first. I want to sort of introduce the podcast with my story so that you know why this is so important for me right now and moving into the future. So I want to begin by saying that I'm sort of in, hell in my own hallway right now because I'm in the middle of my own second reinvention of sorts. But before I tell you about this one, I really want to go back to my very first reinvention and bring you back to how this all began. So, um, my career looked pretty traditional, and I loved it for a very, very long time. I graduated college, and thought I was going to be a psychotherapist and was about to go to graduate school when I didn't get accepted. And I was like floored because I thought, I was a shoo-in. I had moved to California from New York, and I thought I was going to go to UCLA and go to their graduate program. And it didn't work out that way. And I was sort of jobless for quite a while. There I was, alone in California, and I didn't even have a car back then. This was horrible because you can't not have a car in LA, right? And it was awful. But there I was alone, careerless, not knowing what to do. And I sort of took this, nothing job. It was like a job in an insurance company, just doing clerical stuff because I needed to figure out how to support myself and I didn't know what was next. And as it turned out, my father, who was in the women's apparel business as a designer and a technician, was a good networker. And he introduced me to somebody in California who was a very big executive in a big company um, in public relations and marketing. And that person introduced me to a new sales manager. And the new sales manager had just taken the job and needed an assistant in sales. Now, what were they selling? They were selling women's underwear. And I said I had a first interview with my potential boss, and he said, he started to tell me about what this job was. I didn't understand a word of what he was talking about because I had never done anything in sales or anything related to women's underwear and or anything related to retail stores. And it was like, another language going right over my head. I said, listen, I don't know anything about women's underwear. He said, don't worry, I'll teach you. And that was when he told me that I was going to be making, double what I was earning as a clerical, even though I didn't know anything. I was willing. I said, I'm in, right? So I took the job. It was sort of like a completely blind, the blind leading the blind. And I did that. Worked in sales, helping him for 2 years, and I learned about retail, and I learned about manufacturing, and I learned about retailers, and I didn't know any of this. And there were a lot of parts of the job that were menial, but a lot of parts of the job were me traveling to different stores and talking to different salespeople. And I started to build up confidence that way. I was sort of thrown to the wolves, and I had to learn how to talk to people. And it actually turned out to be, an amazing experience. And after about 2 years, I asked my boss if I could go into the product development area. And I have to say that because I was so fascinated with design and product development and how they decided what products to put in the line, that he was so generous. He said, I'm going to talk to our sales manager and see if he'll make an introduction into the product area. And they didn't try to hold me back. In those days, they were incredibly generous and helpful for people, young people in careers. And the next thing I knew, I was an assistant in product development. Eventually, I moved to New York, which is where most of the industry was located. And I just gotten married, and my new husband was going to graduate school, and I had to support us because he wasn't going to be making any money. I needed to make money. We were living in Manhattan. And so I needed a job like fast. So I had set up five interviews the week before we were married. And I got two job offers. And I took the job offer. One offer was small fish, big pond. So that means it was a big company, but I would be a very small fish. The second job offer was big fish, small pond, smaller company, but big job. So I took the latter. I asked my network. I had a lot of mentors back then. I went to people in the industry that I knew, and they were so kind, and they were good mentors. They told me, take the job with the bigger experience. You can always you'll find another job later. And that's what I did. So that led to a 20-year career in an industry that I had known nothing about, but I became a very successful corporate executive in the women's underwear industry for a very, very long time. And I specialized in women's bras, of all things. So I was very knowledgeable about how to develop a bra line. And in fact, so now we're going back, 25 years, and some of the products that I developed are still in the stores today. So it goes to show you that out of nowhere came this amazing career. Now, I loved my career. I traveled all over the world. I traveled all over the country. I had a lot of, I had gained a lot of credibility and I hope respect in the industry, and it was a great industry. It was not a huge industry, but it was a very inspiring. It was fun. It was creative. It was strategic. It was just a combination that fit my personality perfectly. And so I was a leader. I learned how to manage and direct, and I learned how to strategize, and I learned all about production, and I really got to see the world through that kind of a career. And it worked for a really long time. But the industry changed, and this is why I think reinvention is so important a topic. The industry transformed. It became not this very reputable, respectable, um, well-managed, well-led industry. There were some leaders still. I had some pretty great bosses, and then I also had some terrible ones. Like really, along the way, I started to have bosses that were one company sold or one of my best jobs, the company was sold to an investment banking company. And the next thing I know, we were all presented with a golden parachute and took the package and out I went. And now I was jobless. So I went through a series of different jobs in different companies, but all of them were really good jobs and were very reputable companies. But by the end, the industry was changing. And I was now in a job working for a company that no longer had the kind of ethics that I had grown up in. And also at that time, now this is where it got, things sort of there was a juxtaposition of issues. I got cancer, breast cancer, and toward the end of my career, and found myself um, recovering, but I was different. My mortality had been challenged, and um, I started to see things very differently, and I started to be intolerant of the lack of ethics in my leadership. And uh, when I took a new job, I actually had to interview for a new job while I was recovering from breast cancer. But, I was the kind of person, I was just really nose to the grindstone. I was a really driven person, very, very driven. Success was um, was defined for me growing up by my father, who was very hardworking, very dedicated to education. He was an immigrant, had, really enabled his family to be educated and to survive and thrive in, a world that they hardly knew when they came to this country. And I inherited a definition of success that I absolutely welcomed and didn't question and felt very at home with. But when after my bout with cancer, and I started to look for another job, the first thing that happened was something that shocked me. Normally when you take a new job, you go into the department stores and you start looking around at the competitive merchandise so that you get a sense of what's going on at that time and who your competitors are, what products they're introducing. You start talking to salespeople. And I remember going up the escalator to Bloomingdale's in Manhattan. And usually it was so exciting and fun for me. I really enjoyed it. And I got up to the top of the escalator about to go to the department, women's underwear, lingerie department, and I had this sick feeling in my stomach. And I actually wanted to turn around and go down go down the escalator. That had never happened to me before because I had always been eager and enthusiastic and loving, my job. I'd be looking forward to going to Paris and Europe and, and Asia, for new trends. And I didn't feel that way anymore. I just didn't have any, I realized I had, when I got that sick feeling in my stomach and I wanted to turn around and go the other way, I said, something's up. And I didn't know exactly what that was, but I had a feeling that I had come to the end of my road in this career. I didn't have the right language for it at the time, but that's what it started to resonate with me that I might not want to be doing this for the rest of my life, um, adult life. And that had never happened to me before. I really had believed that I was going to retire from that industry for sure. There was no doubt in my mind. Now I had risen through the ranks and my last, I had been now at this point, I had been a vice president of marketing and design for a number of companies. I had earned a reputation. Everybody in the industry knew me and I knew them. And, it was solid footing. So to feel like the ground is moving beneath you for the very first time was absolutely shocking. I didn't even talk to anybody about that. I didn't tell anybody that that's how I felt. At this point, I was married and I didn't have children, but I was married and, there were financial responsibilities. And also at this time, people were not leaving jobs, that were multi-six-figure incomes. You just weren't doing that. The world of entrepreneurship was this universe somewhere out there that I hadn't been trained in. Nobody in my family ever had it. Nobody had ever been an entrepreneur. We were all, corporate, job holders and corporate executives and things like that. So for me, it was like, I didn't know what to make of all of this. And I sort of wandered around. This really went on, this malaise and unhappiness. Here I was in a new job trying to really love it. And I absolutely hated it. It was, I was tolerating every day. And here I was commuting into Manhattan an hour and a half in and an hour and a half back every single day, and miserable. And I really, started to tell my closest friends about it, and they thought I was out of my mind. Um, and I would go out at lunchtime in Manhattan and go get lunch, and I'd be crying in the street, literally crying because I wanted to go back and quit. But I had nothing to quit for, nothing to go to. I just knew I was unhappy. I didn't like my boss. I didn't like my company. I didn't like the ethics. I didn't really care about the industry anymore. I felt like I had outgrown it. And I couldn't talk to anybody about it because everybody in the industry was so wrapped up in it. That's all they talked about it. That's all they really knew. And it was very lonely. And it went on for about, I remember it was going on for about 3 years. But in my fourth year, I found out about this workshop. By the way, I didn't do any nonfiction business book reading. It just wasn't in my perspective. It wasn't in my vision to be getting a coach or anything. We didn't have coaches back then. There wasn't anything like a career coach or anything. There were resume writers and there were job search uh, advisors, but there weren't advisors about how to change a career. And I heard about this workshop. There was a book written, and it was called, can't remember the name of it. Something about changing your life, right? And, and the author created a workshop, a weekend workshop, and it was my very first workshop that I had ever attended. So I went, and I remember it felt so weird to be talking to other people who were exploring. There was nothing specific that was coming to my mind about what I did want to do. I just knew what I didn't want to do. And that was hard because that's the hell, not knowing what you do want to do. Because up until this point, I always knew what I wanted to do. It felt like a no-brainer. It was there. It was clear. It was crystal. It was maybe a different job, maybe a different company, but it was never change careers. It was absolutely clarity until this point. And now I was in no man's land. I couldn't fathom. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I took the workshop. Nothing came out of that. The only good thing was that I'd never been to a workshop before, and it was sort of, I do remember there was one exercise where we had big flip charts around the room, and ideas were, flowing around the room. And I do remember the exercise was something around no idea is a bad idea. All ideas are good. And that was the first time that I had ever encountered thinking that was outside of typical outside of the box that I was in, but it was new thinking, allowing myself to see things differently. That was the only thing I remember about it. And I do remember that there were a few women that I connected with in that session, but I felt pretty lost. But it was one step. And then I had heard about the next thing was I heard about this new thing called coaching. And I started to look into that. I didn't know what coaching really was. It was started by a guy by the name of Thomas Leonard, who had created Coach University. And Thomas Leonard was a really interesting guy. He was he was an accountant, and his clients started asking him for his advice about more than just taxes and their accounting issues. He was talking to his clients were asking him about family stuff and travel stuff and career stuff and all kinds of things relating to their lifestyles and their relationships. And he started advising them and realized that there were a lot of other people who were looking for this kind of advice, but there was no school for it. He created the first teleschool, which meant that we didn't have the internet back then. So he created a telephone class. We called them teleclasses. That was the first iteration of virtual training. And Thomas created Coach University. It was a 2-year program. I remember signing up for it and then backing out. I remember that vividly. It's like I started it and I went, what are you, crazy? You're out of your mind. Stop. And I went back to my job, tried to make it work. And that only lasted a few months. One other thing I do remember in my last job, my boss was really interesting. He was married for a long time, happily married. And one day he came in And he said that his wife, he had to leave really early. He had to leave right away because his wife had an accident. She had fallen, slipped on the ice and fallen and had broken her ankle in like several places. So he left early. And over the next few months, I would ask him how his wife was doing. And he said, she's doing really well. She's recuperating. She was a teacher and she took a lot of time off. And within a year, he was going through a divorce. And he told me that what happened was his wife, she now had a lot of time off of her job. And as she started recuperating, she started taking yoga to support her recovery. And she loved it so much that she started getting trained to be a teacher, a yoga teacher. And what she realized was through this yoga practice and becoming very mindful and becoming more internally focused, she realized that she wasn't happy in her marriage and she wanted out. He was devastated. He never really quite recovered from that. But I remember thinking, she's reinvented herself. And how did she have to go through an accident to actually, is it the accident that prompted her reinvention, or was it there dormant all the while, unhappiness, but she didn't know it because she was too busy being busy? And I remember thinking that that was pretty remarkable. And so here I was, and the next thing that happened was that job that I was in, miserable in, praying every day to go back and quit. It quit on me because my division was closed. The owners of the company decided that rather than try and sell it, or they just closed it. And there I was out of a job. Um, Now, you would have thought that my immediate reaction would have been, great, let's just go for it. No, that's not what happened. I pulled out my laptop and I started to work on my resume. And as my fingers were on the keyboard, I just said, "What are you doing?" And I just stopped. And I said, two thoughts went through my head at this, one right after the other. The first thought was, I'm never going to write another resume again. And the next thought was, I'm never going to have a boss that can give me a pink slip ever again. I'm never going to have another boss again. And those two things have been true ever since. But I still didn't know what I was going to do. And so I think it was around 5 or 6 months, I sat on the couch what I tried to do first was try to recreate my career in women's underwear, sort of making my own products and trying to sell them. And I did a panty package and I did all kinds of things that I don't know where, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. But I didn't really have any good ideas for what to do next. And a friend of my husband's friend told me about this program that he had taken when he changed careers. And he said, I think you should take it. I said, well, what do you mean program? He goes, well, it's a course. And I said, well, what's it about? I thought it was going to be a career change course. He goes, well, I can't quite explain it, but it's a new way of thinking. I said, well, no, I need a career change course. He goes, just trust me, take the course. And I would thought I was out of my mind because I took this course. Actually, I talked to the person who was the coach trainer that was running the course, and he tried to explain it to me, but it made no sense. It was something about a new way of thinking, a new way of seeing the world. And I'm going, I don't know, this is not what I need. And I remember how much it was. It was $1,450 to register for. It was a 15-day course. You took the course on the phone on the phone, so virtual, on the phone for 1 hour every day for 3 weeks, 5 days a week, 5 working days a week. So that was 15 days on the phone for an hour. And I said, well, what am I going to get out of this? He goes, you'll see. And I go, what do you mean you'll see? I don't have money to like throw around. I'm not working. He goes, put it on your credit card. I said, I can't do that. I said, let me think about it. He goes, there's nothing to think about. You've been sitting on the couch for 6 months. I was a good salesperson. Anyway, I was sort of desperate and I signed up for the course. And the course was called Quantum Think. I remember it vividly. Um, and I remember his name was Alan Collins, and he was British, and I really liked him. He was just had a great way of he just had a great way about him. I mean, I had no reality here, none. There was no, it was like complete stepping off a cliff. I had no idea what I was doing. Now, what was also very interesting was at the same time, I was terrified that I had made a huge mistake and I really wanted to back out of the course. But within a couple of days, I went to the mailbox and something weird happened. I got this letter from my insurance company. I opened the letter, and instead of a letter saying that my premiums had been increased, which is what I thought it was, they sent me a check for $1,490. And they said it was an overpayment. And I went, come on, really? And it was sort of like the universe was telling me, you did the right thing, take the course. So I got the little message that it was my time to look beyond my own viewpoint. I took this course. It was all very interesting. I mean, I don't remember every day was a different theme. So it was different way. Basically, the concept of it was that you create your own reality. You create your own results. How you think and how you see the world generates your own results. But it didn't really click in terms of how I was going to use this for my next career. So, I took the classes and it was interesting, but it certainly wasn't practical in my mind, except for the very last day. On the last day, I said, this has been sort of interesting, but a bust in my head. But the last day, the theme was purpose. And it was on purpose, being, what's your purpose? And I went, oh, I I get it now. I what my purpose before was complete. I'm ready for a new purpose. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that once I identified what my purpose was, that I now would be on the right path. So I sat with the whole concept of purpose for a day or so, and it didn't take very long for me to realize that I was in a career transformation, career change, career reinvention, whatever you want to call it, and that I wanted to help other people go through that too. I wanted to help people I had had a very fortunate, successful career. I wanted to have other people have successful careers that made them feel great. It wasn't just being successful financially in my career. I loved what I did. It was so much fun for me. I didn't feel like it was work. It was hard, and there were days where it was painful, but I loved what I did. I wanted to help other people have that experience too. And I felt that that could be my purpose. So I called this trainer after the course was over, and I said, I have been thinking about, I love what you do. I love that you taught this and you're helping people find their next path and have other ways of seeing their careers and their lives. I think I want to do what you're doing. I think I want to be a coach like you. I said, can I do that? And he said something that really enabled me to reinvent myself, literally. And he said, the only thing, he goes, given your background, given what you've been able to accomplish, given your network and who you've worked with, he said, the only thing holding you back from being a great coach is you stepping into it. He goes, the only thing it'll take for you to be a great coach is to be a great coach. And so that was the day that I decided to be a coach. I didn't need Coach University. I didn't need any of it because I really had been a great leader. I had been a very inspiring mentor to a lot of people. And now I'm not saying that I knew everything about how to go about this. In fact, I did know very clearly, once I decided that coaching was going to be my next pathway, I immediately hired a coach to help me create the business for it, because this is the other thing that I knew. And it was this is a new way I was able to look at myself, to look within differently than I had ever done while I had been in the corporate world. In the corporate world, I operated like I'm supposed to know answers when people ask me things or have a problem. I'm supposed to have all the answers. And showing that I don't have all the answers is a sign of weakness and a sign of incompetence. But now I knew that not knowing something was actually an opening to a new doorway. And I realized that I didn't know how, I knew, I knew that I knew how to coach people. I knew I could do that. And that I would only get better and better at it. But what I didn't know, and I also knew that I knew how to help other people build their businesses. But what I recognized I didn't know how to do was I didn't know how to build my own business like this. So I hired a coach to help me start my business. And it was, I hired someone for 3 months. It was a great kickstart. And that was the launch of going from, I call it going from bras to business coach. And it was my reinvention. And from there, it was an interesting journey because Alan's voice was in my head saying the only thing it takes for you to be a great coach is to be a great coach. And so I took him at his word. I took that on and I started telling people that I was now a coach. And they said, what do you mean a coach? They had never heard of this before because it was brand new. And I said, they said like Little League. I said, no, no, no. I'm a career coach and a business coach. And I started doing speaking. I joined Toastmasters and I started doing speaking. And I started doing little workshops at I went to Barnes and Noble and I went to Whole Foods and I started doing workshops and I started to network with executives who were changing jobs, changing careers. And I started doing corporate training and executive coaching. And that was my very first career reinvention. And then, of course, over the years, I started to learn more. I made a lot of mistakes, but what was interesting was even though I had never sold anything before, I had never closed a deal of my own before. I learned how to start networking for my business. I learned how to start closing deals for my business. I read a lot. That's when I started reading a lot of business books and a lot of, the very first book I read was Unstoppable by Cynthia Kersey. And it was all about, it was 45 stories of, people who were normal, regular people who did remarkable things and were unstoppable. And it inspired me to keep going, no matter, even when I felt that I had because, I felt naked. I didn't have my VP title anymore. Nobody who knew what a business coach was. They didn't know anything about, I had to really reinvent myself at a time when coaching was a reinvention in and of itself. So it was hell in the hallway, not knowing what I was going to do. And now it was hell in the hallway building the business. But I knew I was closer. I could feel that my purpose, I was in alignment with a new purpose. And that I loved. That was exciting. There were new ways of being creative. There were new ways I was starting to write. I had a newsletter to write. I had to write my website. I had to start networking. I had to write my elevators. I mean, there were a lot of things I had to start writing and communicating about in ways I had never done before. I wanted to do speaking engagements. I started writing workshops, and it became a whole new creative process, all under the umbrella of supporting professionals in having careers that they love and careers that also enable them to be successful financially. It was a perfect purpose for me. And from there, that was my launch pad. And from there, it became a very progressive, increasingly successful venture. I did a lot of really powerful networking. I was passed from one pharmaceutical company to the next, and then I started networking with some excellent entrepreneurial peer groups, and all the business owners started hiring me for their companies, and I started doing a lot of strategic retreats and workshops on leadership and communications and team building and all of that. And eventually I started teaching professionals how to close business, and that became the next iteration of my business. So that's my story about how I came through the hell in a hallway that felt never ending. And I came out into the light. So was it heavenly? Mostly. There was this heaven in the discomfort of it. There was this heaven in having breakthroughs. There was a heaven in landing my first client and getting my first engagement payment. There was heaven in meeting new people and building a network of powerful people. And when I say powerful people, I mean smart, intelligent professionals. I learned so much. I was I was a sponge for business books. I read everything I could get my hands on that was business book related. And I had gone from reading mostly fiction to almost everything was nonfiction. So the transformation was enormous. So that brings me to, my coaching business really evolved over the years from corporate training to business development trainer to fractional executive. And now I do a lot of coaching and training of fractional executives and consultants in helping them to accelerate their rainmaking and their business development and their client attraction, helping them to position themselves in their business to stand out from the crowd and gain a competitive edge and land clients. But, I've been doing this now for 2 decades and more. And I recently went through another illness, unexpected. I had shingles, and shingles set me back for 2 months. I didn't have the bad rash or anything like that. It was internal, but it was painful and very uncomfortable. And I was on medication for the very first time. I had never been on any medication ever. I was active and I had a very active, you know, um, life, worked out a lot. I danced. I played tennis. I was a dog mom. I had a lot of interest. I also began doing abstract painting in my spare time. So I had a lot of interest, but here I was sort of knocked for a loop for a couple of months. And I started going back to meditation and journaling on a regular basis because I realized that if I wanted my life to change, I needed to change. And my morning routine needed to change. And I started committedly meditating every morning and journaling every morning. And in one of my meditations, I actually saw myself shedding an old skin, shedding all of the regret of the past, whatever regrets I had, shedding all of my disappointment in myself, shedding all of my criticism of myself and others. I saw disappointment or boredom in my career. I literally saw myself shedding an old skin and stepping through the hallway into the light that was in my meditation. And I knew in that moment that reinvention was now in my future, that helping other people go through their career reinventions. And I also knew that we were at a pivotal time where so many people were going through big changes. They were losing jobs and leaving jobs, and now entrepreneurial life was available to everybody. There was a democratization of being able to be an entrepreneur now. And now also you could have a full-time job and have a side hustle. So the old rules were broken. Nobody had to stay within these four walls or even through the walls of a hallway. They could create new careers, but most of the people were struggling because there was still a common pain, and that is not knowing what to do or not knowing when to leave the old and begin the new, or how to even begin. And so I realized that that was my next venture. I still love my coaching business. I still love my coaching clients. I'm continuing to do that work and continuing to work with some fabulous, smart, experienced, highly expertised people, helping them to build their practices and their businesses with momentum. But I'm also creating something new. And I realized that Hell in the Hallway was important to bring forward to people. And so I want to be sharing my story with you, and hopefully it's inspiring and helpful to you in some way. But the stories that I want to share with you of others who have gone through all kinds of reinventions and evolutions and transformations. People who are thinking about it, people who are in the messy middle, and people who have come out the other side. into the bright sunlight. Or maybe they've come out the other side and, it's been happy for a while and they're going to reinvent again. But all the rules are sort of broken now. So, I want you to know that you're invited to come along on this journey with me. I'm smack in the middle of my own reinvention right now. I'll be sharing about that. I have a new Substack um, uh, profile that you can follow me on. And I post about everything about career change and business change and reinvention, personal and professional. So join me and also, stay tuned for my upcoming episodes and I'll be interviewing. And by the way, if you have a reinvention story that you would like to share with the world, please reach out to me. So I hope this has been helpful and that maybe it resonates with you on some level. And maybe it's opening your eyes to something new and fresh. Maybe it's giving you permission to see yourself differently. Maybe it's giving you encouragement that taking the first step is just the first of many, but it's a first step, and that you don't have to have it all figured out. And so with that, I want to thank you for being with me. I'm Nancy Fox. I'm the host of Hell in the Hallway. And I'm going to really be, become a leader in the field of reinvention. That's my plan to, help others through the path of reinvention, transformation, and evolution. So I'll see you soon. Bye.